Welcome. My name is Bill Bodie. I'm with the Development Department here at CSIS, and it's my honor to moderate this very distinguished panel of leaders and experts. The title of the panel is "The Future of Ukraine's Defense Industrial Base." Now, this conference is about doing business in Ukraine and enhancing Ukraine's security. Kiev's military capabilities and its emerging defense industrial base are hugely important to achieving those objectives, both of being able to do business, being able to help develop that the economy, integrating Ukraine into the global marketplace, and enhancing Ukraine's security. All of that is covered within this the topic of our panel here. Now, wars are a lot of things, but every war is a laboratory for future conflict, each offering lessons on the changing character of warfare, as well as the evolution of military and industrial organizations. The biplanes and motorized vehicles that were used relatively sparingly in World War I begat blitzkrieg, strategic bombing, and carrier-based aviation in World War II. The military mobilization of American industry in World War II through the War Production Board and the construction of the Pentagon, among other things, signaled a new era of huge integrated defense enterprises, joint command organizations and doctrine, and an industrial base that helped to win the Cold War. The combined arms of allied nations in the Gulf War of 1990-91, along with the stealth, long-range precision strike systems, and the emerging use of space assets in the military context continue to characterize today's great power competition. And so it is with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which I don't need to remind anyone in this room began over 10 years ago with the seizure of Crimea and parts of the Donbass in 2014 and continued with a full-scale invasion in 2022. Much of the world hails Ukraine's dogged defense of its people, its territory, and its sovereignty, while others are looking closely at Ukraine's development and application of things like drone technologies, cyber, electronic warfare, and information operations, and the algorithmic tools that are being tested every day on battlefields around Kherson, Kharkiv, and finally in Kursk. Military leaders and technologists in the West, and of course those in Beijing and other adversary capitals, are working hard to discern and incorporate these developments for their own purposes. Now, does Ukraine offer lessons for the West about these new tools, often fielded by small companies with few resources beyond the hard work and ingenuity of their founders and employees? And are there demand signals from those battlefields that should spark future defense investment? What are the policy and business obstacles for current and future collaboration between Western defense companies and the entrepreneurs of Ukraine? And how can we cut through them? This afternoon's panel will explore these critical issues. And again, we are very fortunate to have an extremely impressive panel of experts on military and political affairs, financial and investment issues, and we have one of the key exemplars of the burgeoning industrial base in today's Ukraine. So right to my left, I'll introduce our panel. To my left is Samuel Bendit. He is the senior advisor for the Center for Naval Analysis, where he works on CNA's Russia Studies program, focusing on Russian military technology developments, autonomous systems, among many other areas of academic interest. My favorite part of his resume is that he is an honorary mad scientist with the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command's Mad Scientist Initiative. Didn't know that existed, but I'm happy to hear it. And he has been looking at disruptive technologies such as robotics and AI in the military sphere. Next to Sam is Dave Morgan, the executive chairman of Simul Media, a software firm. Dave is what's known as a serial entrepreneur who has invested in dozens of startups and is currently advising several firms in the technology space in Ukraine. Next to Dave is Mary Beth Long, someone who is very, very familiar, a good friend of those of us at CSIS. She is the founder of her own legal and policy advisory firm and is also the director of global security at the Wilson Center. And she's got a resume that would take longer than this entire session to read through of accomplishment in government, academia, and legal affairs. Next is Yaroslav Tekliuk. He is the CEO of Armadrone, one of over 200 private companies that are involved in dozens of designs of new drones and UAVs in Ukraine, up from something like 30 before the war. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about his experiences and his outlook as an actual businessman and creator on the ground. And then finally, we have Denis Gurak. He is the co-founder of MITS Capital, that is the Military Investment and Innovation Technology Solutions Capital. It is a merchant bank that facilitates US and NATO access to Ukraine's defense technology ecosystem. Now, Denis is another serial entrepreneur in Ukraine, and he has been very, very focused on the biotech arena, which is one of the critical technology areas in which Ukraine can become a world leader. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our panelists kind of an open-ended question, and then we'll just take it from there. We'll go for as long as we can, up to 4:30, and hopefully get in some of your questions as well. So let me start with you, Sam. Could you give us an assessment of sort of where the conflict stands from an operational perspective, particularly how Ukraine and Russia have experimented with some of these new capabilities that you've been looking at, and how have they adapted to what the other side is doing, and who is learning and innovating better?
Thank you, and thanks to CSIS for hosting us. I think it's a very important event and a very important panel discussion. This war is a battle lab, as you have already indicated. This war is also probably one of the most copy-paste type of conflicts in modern history, where an initiative or a technological breakthrough or development by one side is very quickly adapted by the other side, and a countermeasure to that breakthrough is adapted at the same time. So what we have in Ukraine today is Ukraine usually leads in innovation when it comes to tactical deployment of certain technologies like drones and UAVs, electronic warfare system, counter-UAV systems, and similar technologies. Russian military learns, adapts similar technologies, uses them against Ukrainians. In parallel with that, it develops different types of countermeasures, and then Ukrainian military will have to adapt in turn. So it's this seesaw type of approach to military innovation. But Russian military recognizes that a lot of Ukrainian breakthroughs have indeed contributed to a lot of successes at the front. And the Russian military looks at Ukrainian defense industrial complex as well as its startup community and lots of military volunteers as those who are leading the way in a lot of technology development. Russia is trying to adapt some of those concepts. It is trying to copy some of the Ukraine's more successful approaches to tap into the large quantity of different types of military products and inventions. So Russia is adapting concepts and methods similar to Ukraine's Brave One and United 24 approaches and the like. But at this point, Ukraine is obviously fighting for survival. And so every bit of technology advantage matters absolutely. And there's a lot of attention on what Ukraine has done and what Ukraine continues to do. Tactically speaking, Russian military continues to throw soldiers at the Ukrainian positions. It continues to waste a lot of lives in trying to take territory, and has wasted probably more soldiers in the last several years of this conflict than in most of the modern conflicts around the world, going back several decades. But for Russia, human lives matter a lot less than they do for the Ukrainians. And so for Ukraine, technology is key. In fact, a lot of politicians in Ukraine, a lot of military individuals A lot of volunteers and other personalities who are assisting Ukrainian technology development are saying that Ukraine must field advanced technologies, Ukraine must field robotics, drones, and similar systems so they can fight first, and soldiers will fight afterwards. Russia sees that approach and seeks to copy that, but again, Russia has more resources, and it can throw a lot of those resources into the war. Russian military was surprised on multiple occasions, starting with the initial invasion. And right now, Russia has to fight on its own territory and cannot quite explain how exactly to deal or explain Kursk incursion by the Ukrainians to its people and to its government. But technology leads the way in this war, and Ukraine leads the way in a lot of technological breakthrough, especially when it comes to the application of those tactical systems that matter the most at the front.
Now, long-range strike has been a recent strategic adaptation for the Ukrainians since the beginning of the invasion. I mean, last week there were strikes on Russian munition storage facilities in Tikhoretsk, in Tver, and Toropets. And yet, President Zelensky has emphasized that Ukraine is doing this with its own capabilities, with its own weapons, without the means or the cooperation of their partners. How are they doing that? Was there a pre-existing sort of stock of long-range strike systems, or have they been able to adapt some existing systems and enhance their capabilities?
Ukraine has a very significant legacy after the collapse of the Soviet Union when it comes to knowledge and experience in lots of defense technologies, and especially in high tech. So Ukraine as a country has some of the smartest and most capable people in the world looking at how to develop and build military systems. There's been decades worth of innovation in Ukraine proper, most of them in the civilian sector. So Ukraine actually has a lot of smart people it can lean upon to build and field those systems. In fact, if we look at the amount and quantity of these long-range UAVs which are striking Russia, they range from refurbished Soviet systems to refurbished civilian aircraft to military-grade UAVs to something that is probably put together in a garage, literally a flying pipe with wings and a camera in the motor that can fly for several hundred kilometers. So there's a very significant range in what Ukraine has done so far and what Ukraine can do. And a lot of technologies involved in this conflict actually are commercial technologies. And a lot of people working on Ukrainian defense innovation come from the commercial sector. They come from the private sector because they worked in that sector prior to the Russian invasion.
Now, Dave Morgan, you're someone very much involved with commercial technology, and you're someone with an extremely successful track record of investment in both the U.S. and Ukraine. What do you think are some of the opportunities for Western investors in Ukraine in this space?
I think they're extraordinary. I'm new to Ukraine. A year and a half ago, I'd never been there. Tomorrow, I go back for my 6th visit. I'm new to military defense tech. I've literally been designing technology to change the ads on your TVs and personal computers, and I apologize for those.
An AOL man, huh?
Yeah, I apologize for those shoes that keep following you around on the internet. Behavioral targeting was one of, but I knew there was a lot of great technology in Ukraine, and so I decided to go about 15 months ago to see if I could help. And because they've done a lot of work in our industry, and what I found there was an unbelievably focused, dynamic, innovative talent pool that wanted to make a difference. As I started looking at startups I could help with, I was fortunate to have a meeting with then Minister Commission, now I think you can say he's a special assistant, but who was running strategic industries. And I said, well, here's what I think I can do. And he's like, well, yeah, we have amazing, lots of cooks. We have so many tech, we have lots of tech cooks, but we don't have that many chefs. So if you can help guide, that could be helpful. I'm like, great, like where should I apply myself? He said, I said, you have 7 different industries and strategic industries. He said, no, there's only one strategic industry. Like defense. So I'm like, okay, I'll focus there. What I found is someone without a background there. Everybody is working to help. Everybody that's not in the front line is trying to support the front line, and they're all doing projects in the garage. And they're getting feedback, not just a formal feedback, but they're getting signal and video from someone on the front line showing how they're launching something and it didn't work, and can you figure a way to innovate it? And I started talking to everyone wants to do a side project in tech, and they want to do defense ones. And so they're all flying drones. And so I started meeting with all these companies. And then I looked at it as a classic tech investor and tech entrepreneur, which is the little companies and the little ones win. I mean, 4 of the 6 largest companies in the world today by market cap are tech, and largely fueled by advertising. They didn't exist. They were tiny companies 35 years ago. So I'm certain the startups will win. And I don't know what that means for primes, but I'm certain startups, they'll have to buy them. That's usually how M&A happens. And that the talent is there to do it. And you start looking at these problems that are very classic. Like, I learned when, you're in a missile alert and you're getting spoofed GPS and you can't walk across the city. Like, you learn that, of course, the US artillery shells and drones that use GPS and satellite for their navigation are going to fail. We forgot 50 years ago we had great inertial navigation systems, but we discarded them. And so making investments in areas like that, and then to the point we're just talking about the depth of historical talent. So I'm like, where do you find it? And so I go visit a Antonov design lab, in the East. And then I go meet these 75-year-old engineers and radiophysicists who are just brilliant. And of course, they made, things that put satellites into space. And so solving these problems and having so much commercial availability and access to things. So I just see all of the dynamics. It's a massive growing market facing incredible technology disruption, very obvious problem sets, whether that's, you have to do, high volume, low cost, highly effective systems are doing them really well. You have to optimize every day, every second, which they're doing really well. And so I think we all have to be there, not just because we need to win the war, but to win the peace. I cannot imagine that we're not going to see Ukraine as a centerpiece in 10, 15, 20 years of an incredible defense industrial production capacity that is going to be one of the most important in the world. Certainly we need it.
Of course, a lot of American tech startups started small, but then they scaled up into some of the giants of today that dominate our equities markets and so on. Do you see a path for some of these Ukrainian companies with outstanding ideas, innovation, and talent being able to attract the kind of investment that would enable them to scale so that they can be the big techs of tomorrow?
Yeah, I do. I think we forget that most of the reason the Silicon Valley worked so well was that people like Hewlett and Packard were there, and so they made personal investments when banks and large institutions wouldn't. So the access to, for me, it's an exited founder. So I'm not worried about insurance. I'm not worried about market risk. I'm not worried about product risk. I'm not worried about war risk because I want to make a difference. And so I think you're going to see a lot of capital from non-traditional sources coming in to incubate these companies. Firms like Dennis's are going to help accelerate and make a really big difference here. And once they get going, they're making better weapons in areas where we're clearly making inferior weapons. So I don't think there's a question of both partnerships and transfer. I would say as a former lawyer, dealing through some of the legal system, there's a lot of modernization in DIA and DIA City, and I have 2 DIA City entities stood up now. There's a lot of changes. There's some things that still need to happen for some of the investment structure to happen, some changes in securities laws, but I think they're all well understood. So I'm very certain that if we look out 5, 10 years, the future Googles, Amazons, Apples of the defense world will have very significant Ukraine roots.
Fascinating. Mary Beth Long, you're a current lawyer, but you've also a former senior official with the United States Department of Defense, with NATO, elsewhere in the United States government. You've been an advisor to military and political leaders around the world. You know where the bodies are buried in terms of the acquisition system, in terms of export policy. What do you think are the greatest barriers to further defense cooperation between the United States, Western Europe, and Ukraine? And how can we disrupt or mitigate those challenges, whether it's our acquisition system, our export control policy, or security clearances, on and on?
Well, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
unlike David, I had no clue how Ukraine really represented the brain trust of European innovation, of unbelievable tech prowess, all the way back into 2008. I'm sitting at the table with Secretary Gate, and we're meeting one-on-one with the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, discussing Ukraine coming into NATO in a private room. And we left the room, and Secretary Gates turned to me and said, Maribeth, if we were smart, you and I would be investing in Ukraine aviation technology and maritime technology, because they really lead the way. Of course, we didn't, because we were in government at the time. But, you know, as you know, I think there's some really amazing opportunities, and we are in our own way, as usual. We're literally stumbling over ourselves in the US government, and there's an opportunity here to learn so much with Ukraine. And in some respects, private industry is out ahead of us, and we need to marry those capabilities. And the first thing we need to do is to get out of the way on infrastructure. Critical decision that Ukraine needs to make, you know, is it going to be an Amazon system, or is it going to be a Huawei system? Huge implications from an intelligence and from a defense standpoint, and from a practical standpoint. If we can get together on those kinds of infrastructure building and collaboration, and lay the groundwork, to take advantage of the three things that Ukraine has that the US needs and we've gotten past. And one is we've consolidated our industrial primes from 51, I think we're down to 5 now, and we've lost our ability to be nimble, we're expensive, we're heavy, and we're slow. And Ukraine, on the other hand, represents the exact opposite in all of those places where we're trying to get to again. Lockheed Martin can't develop something in a 5-year time frame. The feedback loop on how something is performing, how far it can go. Do we want a dumb bomb? Do we want a man in the middle? What are the roles? We just can't do that the way we used to, and we've decimated our industrial base in the military and defense realm, so that we've left an entire middle that we've abandoned, basically. And if we could get out of our own way and, for example, really incentivize partnerships, co-investments, shortening that cycle of feedback by having US companies incentivize either from a tax credit standpoint or from not having to go through DSCA and the interminable FMF and FMS cases that are so cumbersome. The system just is not designed to support a war. And we knew that in Afghanistan and Iraq, but because we're not directly involved, we're pretending like those lessons learned don't apply anymore. This should not be handled through DSCA, except for maybe the functionalities of how the funds are actually are distributed, and maybe the approval process for actual purposes. But from an R&D and development and fielding perspective, where we're missing out on what are the tactical implications of what is being deployed, and what can the US learn from that? Because our next war is going to move this fast and faster, yet we've exited and we've removed ourselves from the do loop. Another policy decision. Too few security cooperation guys downrange. And most of them are so far from the battlefield or are just regionally located that the feedback cycle, the ability to even maintain, repair, and innovate is totally disconnected from the US. Thirdly, we've very much limited the role of the commercial section or sector downrange. Only so many contractors, and only so many contractors can be so far from the actual implementation of the products and services that are being really utilized in the war effort. We need to change that. We need to shorten that loop. We need to shorten that feedback loop. We need to be innovating with Ukraine. I have this fantasy of Ukraine becoming the US's main partner that fills that gap in many really important ways of our decimated, innovative, really technically oriented, particularly in aviation. Motor seat, what could we learn just from motor seat? What could we learn from many of the Ukraine experiences that we just don't have anymore? We walked away from it in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we can replace the partnership that Ukraine had with the Russians, with the Soviets, become a main innovator, we can supply some of the manufacturing, some of the export and other issues that Ukraine has from a scalability perspective. They can supply us with the innovation, the tech, the masterful tech that's available, and fill that gap and innovate and basically on the run, actually test. We spend billions of dollars testing, billions and billions and billions, which is one of the reasons why our stuff costs so much. Things are being tested. The Chinese and the Russians and others are watching it play itself out on the battlefield. And I'm not clear that we're really capturing that information, turning it around quickly, and producing the results, or modifying our weaponry, modifying our tactics, modifying our intelligence, because we're not there. Yeah. Anyway, that's my big dream. I think it can be done. No one's thinking about it. Take DSCA out of the loop, except for programmatics. Get the Army and the innovators downrange to see how this stuff is working, so that we can learn on the ground. I realize that limiting the involvement of the United States military is sensitive for a lot of policy reasons, but let's sort of be a little bit more nimble ourselves. And if the commercial sector is willing to step in, by my understanding, they are and have from the beginning. They beat the US government into the whole data and information collection. Let's leverage that. Let's leverage European partners who are a little more flexible getting folk on the ground if we can't or won't do it. That's sort of my overall.
You know, after World War II, the United States did a lot to rebuild Western Europe, to rebuild Japan. It put into place many special incubator programs to get industry, up and running. Of course, we all know about the Marshall Plan and so on. What's keeping us from applying that kind of policy creativity today?
Us.
Well, is it a legislative thing? Is it a national consensus?
It's a failure of imagination, frankly. I really think that's the driving force. Look, we robbed Germany of all its best scientific, when it came to missile tech, when it came to space. We literally took it from the enemy, brought it home, incubated it, and catapulted us beyond the Russians within just a matter of decades. It's a failure of imagination, number one. Number two, we are so stuck in the bureaucratic processes. DSCA is no longer policy driven. First thing I would do is I would take our Defense Security Cooperation Agency and those processes and stick them back under policy, so you can at least drive the policy through the mechanism of security cooperation, instead of security cooperation being just sort of it's like a big, complicated, moribund, unresponsive process that everybody just clenches their teeth as soon as they hear about it. It doesn't need to be that way. It should be a tool of policy. Thirdly, get people downrange. Get the Army downrange and understanding what's going on. Get Air Force guys downrange. I get the complications of that. Fine, take people who are exiting, take some of these amazing American veterans who are in industry and get them downrange. So we're on the ground, building the relationship, shortening that do loop between what works, and as my colleague just talked, the Russians are innovating like this. If we think this is fast, 10 years from now, 10 months from now, when we're fighting the Russians and the Chinese in a geographic area where we've got a lot less flexibility because NATO is not there, geographically it's going to be challenging. Do we think it's going to be slower? No, it's going to be faster. So we need to use this as an opportunity to advance our strategy and our processes for that next conflict as well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Hear, hear. Our keynote speaker this morning, Erin McKee from USAID, the one line I really liked in her remarks was how important it was for us to put into place the ability to disrupt the authoritarian playbook. It seems like we've got to disrupt our own playbook too in certain ways, but in terms of that failure of imagination, one person who is the opposite of failure of imagination is Yaroslav Tekliuk, the CEO of Armadrone, and you are one of those now up to 200 private companies involved in dozens of designs of new drones. And you've got, Samuel talked about there was a lot of engineering and technical talent from the Soviet days, but it's a very different defense industrial enterprise than one that existed during the Soviet era, one in which entrepreneurs like yourself are moving with the speed and the creativity to meet the threats of today and to show promise for integrating new commercial technologies on the battlefield quickly and efficiently. What does your experience tell you about the future industrial space, and how does it feel to be sort of on the front lines, if you will?
Thanks. Actually, if we think about our work, we should first of all think that we are acting into it's like a room with at least 4 walls, and which actually create some limits. And first of all, we have limits of money. Second, we have limits of time. Third, we have limits of resources. And fourth, we cannot predict our development for a couple of years. This is a luxury, for example, American and Western company have. And based on these limits, we need to move fast. We need to act as cost-effective as possible. And we need to test every solution, again, as quick as possible. And to think that, again, we need to save money, to invest wisely, and we cannot allow ourselves to spend some extra resources on the R&D, for example. And based on this approach, we developed our drones, so which, according to our belief, should be with very efficient cost of mission, should be multi-use and multi-purpose, and they should be easy to operate, etc. The same, it's almost crucial to test all our devices at frontline, and as it's almost standard procedures that we have a team which every month visit frontline and spend some time there together with guys who use our devices, and sometimes they even participate in military operation, and they have a good understanding which solutions works at which areas of front line. Because, for example, some solution may work in Zaporozhye or something close to Zaporizhzhia. At the same time, it will not work in Donetsk region, etc. Then limit of resources as well. Under resources, I mean not just money, first of all, technologies. And we had to invest into development of own technologies. Let's imagine 2022 when we started serial production of our drones. We tried to get all necessary stuff, all components from US, from Germany, from Canada, from Israel, and everyone told us, okay guys, okay, but we are not ready to supply it to Ukraine. So we have double-use products, and our policy does not allow us to do it. And we had to invest into development of some software, which is crucial for us. We invested into development of GNSS receivers into CRPA, which very complicated technologically, and it took almost 1.5 years for these guys who are working over this project to come to the end, and we are waiting currently the result, and it looks promising. Then we invested into the project which develop radio and video links, and we expect a good result as well soon. So that's actually, we on one hand were in a situation when we needed to do almost everything ourselves. On other situation, we, as I mentioned, like didn't have enough money to spend, and we need to invent something new, to invent some new approaches. And the same with Ukrainian militaries. They develop new method of use, like some items or some devices which are like well known. They used drones as a bomber. They try to use the drones as interceptors. They again attacked by drones, helicopter, and they invented drones like to use them to attack Russian ships, etc. So that's, I would on one hand say the recipe is very simple. On other hand, we are unfortunate to be in such situations that we need to use this approach.
What's the biggest surprise you've seen in the course of the last 2 years, either good or bad from your side?
Like the biggest surprise for me are our people. We actually have a lot of bright people, and so I know that Ukraine has like very educated population. But at the same time, for example, I well know that Ukrainian science was underfinanced since gaining of independence. And when people during the war, without money, started creating something which requires a lot of resources and a lot of time in usual condition, for example, as a CRPA antenna, so it's like usually R&D guys will ask for like 10 million and a couple of years to work. I mean, if they do it from the scratch. And Ukrainian guys without like money, so like they had some money, but it cannot be compared with usual spending for R&D from some big Western companies. They did it during 1 year. And doing this in the interval between military service.
Wow.
Because when they served and stayed at front line, they of course didn't have time to do it. So as people.
And how would you assess the capabilities of the occupier in terms of drones and UAVs?
Oh, unfortunately, they have huge capabilities because I wouldn't like maybe to criticize our government, but Russia spent a lot of money for what they want. And if Putin says that, okay, I want drones, he simply pay a lot of money to get these drones. And they are successful in it. We do not have such a luxury. Ukrainian state is not that rich to like spend even millions. I'm not talking about tens or hundreds of millions, even millions for development of military project. So like we can get some state contracts, etc., but we do not get any support from the state. But Russia had such support.
But in terms of the performance, the technical capabilities, the operational doctrine in which the UAVs are used, how would you assess that?
But I just would like to add something to what I have already told. I think that the Russian approach, on one hand, it's their strength, because they have like state, or Putin said that I need it, and like people doing that. But at the same time, this is a weakness, because they designate the executor of this contract, and in Ukraine we have like free market, and we can get like 20 teams working simultaneously on the same project, not the same, but on similar projects. And the most successful team may get some better result and could be contracted by the state, or can build some production and sell it worldwide. So that gives us, I believe, better possibilities to get better products.
Very good. Dennis, speaking of the free market, you're a tremendous enabler of the free market in Ukraine, bringing Westerners in contact with Ukraine's defense technology ecosystem, and also introducing Ukrainians to folks in the U.S. From where you sit, how has this conflict changed your outlook for Ukraine's future industrial and economic prospects?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me. Just answering directly with all my Ukrainian directness, I think it accelerates the inevitable. So, but there are two possibilities of the inevitable still. So we're at the tipping point. Whether Ukraine gets integrated defense industry-wise into the Western supply chains, and that will prolong the existence of the liberal world order for as long as it can, or we lose and we get integrated into Chinese and Russian supply chains, and then the liberal world order will accelerate its decline very fast. So that's actually the thesis that we're promoting with what we're doing at MITS Capital. We want to bring as much money as possible into domestic Ukrainian industry because we believe it's the most sensible way to win the war. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So a lot has been said, about, Ukraine's like historical capability. But just I want to break it down to like specifics so everyone understands how significant is this. Okay, so Antonov is one thing. It's strategic airlift. The only other plane that exists in the world is C-5 that can carry as much weight as Antonov's AN-124 Ruslan. So without Antonov, Russia cannot deliver large quantities of weapons for long distances fast. Okay. Then there's Motor Siege, which Mary Beth mentioned. It is the only supplier of all helicopters, of all Russian engine helicopters. So unfortunately, the civil version of the engine and the military version of the engine don't differ much. And unfortunately, the guy who used to own this company appeared to be a Russian agent. He's now being tried for treason. But the company is now nationalized. So that company in itself has huge leverage over Russia and over China for that matter. They tried to actually replicate it in China with that former owner. Anyways, but there are two other, there are many more, but I just want to name two others. One is also in turbines. It's called Zorya Mash Project, or just simply for Americans, ZM, let's call it. So ZM manufactures 25 megawatt turbines in Mykolaiv. And these turbines are turbines for all essentially Russian ships that are not diesel. And those are turbines that are main turbines in the gas transportation system, which is like obviously one of Russia's geopolitical leverages. And the fourth one is Yuzhmash or Pivdenmash. It's in Dnipro, and it designed and manufactured half of Russian ICBMs, SS-18 Satan, and serviced some others. So no one knows how do Russian ICBMs fly for 10 years now. Without all those critical capabilities, their defense industry will collapse, and that's why the war has always been inevitable. And that's just one part in like strategic importance of Ukraine. Second part is critical mineral reserves. So by some estimates, it's 14 trillion. By some estimates, it's 20 plus trillion. Nonetheless, they're all in eastern Ukraine, around same locations where all these facilities are. So just as a fact, what happened when this whole thing started back in 2013, 2014, so when the revolution kicked off, you remember Yanukovych didn't sign the association agreement with the EU. And then the third day when it happened, Rogozin, the then vice prime minister, came to all these facilities and announced that they will do joint ventures and Russia will invest in this capability because it's just impossible to recreate all that. So, but that's just like an example of strategic importance, and it's just a tip of the iceberg. So, like it just, And in the course of my life, I've proven to myself, and I've seen it multiple times, like how efficient we can be. It's something like in our mentality. We were bound to be efficient for hundreds of years, so it's like generational knowledge being passed. We just don't have any other option. And secondly, we don't have an option to lose, right? So, and if you take this whole picture, like a helicopter view, we believe that there is no other way for the West to remain its geopolitical stance unless Ukraine is integrated into NATO and US supply chains fast, like right now. Because like, if we think that there's a new Cold War or the new Third World War happening is just now hybrid, like you guys are losing it, or we're all losing it collectively. That's what's happening. And it's not just like Russia has unlimited resource to push on the front lines. They're pushing everywhere. Like imagine what starts happening if they simultaneously provoke Taiwan, then Korea, then again Middle East, or God forbid Pakistan versus India. If Pakistan versus India starts, that's just, that's gonna, US will not be able to cope with it. Because, yeah, so like the time is running out, frankly, and like what is, I think how the US defense industry reacts to this is counterproductive, frankly, because like everyone knows in the industry, what I'm talking about is like an obvious fact. Everyone knew this for decades. It's just a no-brainer. But nonetheless, US defense primes want to continue the business as they are used to. So yeah, so US allocated, let's say 100 billion for weapons. Out of this 100 billion, most of it remained in the US, which is fine, which is like sensible for your state, etc. But like for 1 billion of investment into production in Ukraine, you could have had this like such a result. I don't know. We've invented this catchphrase like for 10 billion, we can, I don't know, kill all Russians on the front lines, just to show that how the different value of the money. So I'll pause there because I can talk about it for hours. But basically, that's our thesis, and we believe it should happen. So because if it doesn't happen, this meaning systemic investment into Ukraine's defense industrial capability, right, then the West is at huge risk.
You really laid out a very, very interesting picture about the Russian dependencies on Ukraine, whether it was Antonov or the turbines or Yuzhmash. There's also the gas pipelines going through Ukraine. The great Australian analyst and former General Mick Ryan writes that wars are national undertakings and must be won by military as well as a full array of non-military endeavors. Do you think is Ukraine maximizing the non-military endeavors to put pressure on Russia, either via these economic dependencies, on information operations, on global diplomacy, et cetera? Because it does seem like if it's just force on force ratios, Russia is going to win, but there are some asymmetric advantages that Ukraine may have. No?
Yeah, definitely. Like one of the things that we're maximizing is this commercial tech sector, which is now all working for the military. Like one of the reasons why this rapid drone development was possible is because we have more than 300,000 people working in commercial tech and outsourcing companies and product companies that all basically switched to defense. And historically, defense industry promoted commercial industry development, but now it's going backwards. So basically, all these drones are built on commercial technologies, and that's it was a natural thing to happen. Strategically, like we're doing something, what we can do, just we cannot stop doing, we cannot stop fighting, obviously, but we just have to do so many things at once. So I would say that in PsyOps, to the degree that we can be successful, we are, or we were. But encountering the encountering the propaganda, Russian propaganda that exists in the West, we started losing like a year ago. So I think Russia started controlling the global narrative something like a year ago. Till that time, we were the front runner. But unfortunately, maybe fortunately for us, we finally think as a nation, we realized that, we have to do this thing on our own. Like, it's our job to do it. Because, of course, the West helps and we appreciate it a lot and all that, but inevitably it's us who need to solve this because it's our historical battle, So, I can go into details about, different sectors that you've mentioned, but overall, I just want to say one example, what led me to realize, that we're on our own. So in the early days of this full-fledged invasion, I was living in the US and I went to DC because I used to work for the government, so I knew people at the embassy, and I just came and said, I'm going to volunteer here because it's the second time when the war started for me. So I was involved in a push to convince big tech to actually, cut off Russia, I don't know, just stop YouTube in Russia. As an example, there are multiple things that we came up with, even cutting them down from GPS. Why not? It appeared that technically it was impossible in terms of GPS, but some other stuff was possible. And the answers that we received from big tech were just outrageous. They actually did the opposite. So basically, David knows this ads business, right? So we could have, what's the problem for Google to shift its algorithms so we spam them, so we spam YouTube and all the internet in Russia with our propaganda? That made sense, early on in the invasion, but Google didn't want to do any of that. Obviously they have their own reasons, et cetera, but back then we had, such an emotional state, we were come on guys, you're our friends, partners, why are you not helping? This is an obvious thing, why you're not doing this? And then I realized that, we have to do this on our own, so.
Wow. Dave, back to you on the tech sector at the beginning of this war. I mean, what could they have done? What should they have done? Recognizing that they're responsible to shareholders and American companies and so on. But do you think that some of the tech companies could have been a little more leaning forward in terms of
100%? Yeah, I think we've only now started to see some leaders come out and recognize that that this is a binary decision and that you only can have one right side of it. This is liberty, democracy against autocracy and tyranny. These tech companies could not exist if they were not started, funded, and protected by the U.S. laws and all of these U.S. protections. And the idea that they have perceived themselves, and I'm old enough that I know a number of these people because I remember when they were just little startup people sharing panels with me sometimes. And a number of them believe they're extra-national. They believe they've ascended to that, and they have to understand, no. I give a lot of credit to Alex Karp, who says, no, we have a really clear position here, and we're gonna be on the side of right and not the side of wrong. To Dennis's point, there's so much Google could do to make things really difficult for the Russian population by things like shutting down YouTube and things like that and search. But there's enormous dependencies. There's so much infrastructure they control, they could turn off. There's a lot of these companies, they could become, I think if you go back and look at the innovations that came out of the close understanding and partnership of like AT&T through the Cold War. There's an amazing book called The Idea Factory, and you look at, you know, like GPS was born because there was a military need, and these engineers were in a cafeteria listening to Sputnik pings and realized there was a Doppler effect, and from that they basically built a paper and then built GPS. We need that kind of public-private cooperation and a recognition that we only have the benefits that we have in this country to get rich starting these tech companies because we have the protection of the world's most important, powerful liberal democracy. And I'm 100% with Dennis that if we don't engage pretty quickly, we will be on the other side of that, and we'll be fighting, to prevent from losing that.
Yeah, very good, very good. It is quite amazing when you think back to things like GPS and, of course, the DARPA net and
The
internet.
The internet, the transistor, the
All-
integrated chip, every single one of those came out of military funding into Bell Labs and military support and close talking on the phone every day.
Yeah. And there was a real sense of national
duty.
purpose and
Duty and mission.
national duty. Well, I think we could go on for many more hours, I think, on all of these subjects. It's a terrific and very eclectic group here. But please join me in thanking our panelists for this panel today. Thank you all. I would just like to say one last word of thanks, and that is to our simultaneous translators. I go to a lot of these conferences, and I have to tell you, one of the most difficult jobs at any of these multinational events is to have to deal with the jargon, the acronyms, the speech patterns of American academics and international folks, and to be able to do that in real time as the discussion is going on is a tremendous feat. So I'd like, if possible, if we could just give a little round of applause for our translators. And finally, thank you to Dan Rundy, the mastermind behind this conference and our director of our project on prosperity and development. Thank you all very much. Thank you.